The 2016 presidential race already highly contentious, with the GOP candidates looking to set themselves apart from the field. Education is a way to do that, emerging as a major point of debate, particularly after the 2001 passing of No Child Left Behind. Joining us right now is a candidate taking a clear position on the issue, Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, Republican presidential candidate. Senator, good to have you on the program.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. So I want to talk about a number of your policies and how you are going to rise above the din of various policies out there and solutions from your colleagues in the field. But let me start on education, because Kentucky was the first state in the country to adopt Common Core standards for English and math back in 2010. But you have said it would lead to chaos. You said you would get rid of it all tomorrow. Department of Education ought to be done at the state and local level, and you would get rid of it. Explain your solution.
Well, you know, I grew up in a Republican Party that said that education was a state and a local issue. In fact, when Ronald Reagan ran in 1980, he said he wanted to get rid of the Department of Education. That was part of the Republican platform from 1980 to 2000. But then when we got sort of more Bush type of Republicans, they actually doubled the size of the Department of Education, were in favor of things like Common Core. And I think this is a mistake, because I don't want a national curriculum. I think that there's a danger that bias will enter into it. Often a liberal bias could enter into the curriculum. And so I think it ought to be done more locally. So I'd get rid of the Department of Education. I wouldn't have national testing standards. I wouldn't have Common Core. But I'd let it be determined by the states and the localities.
Has it not worked, in your opinion, in terms of the testings and the impact on actual students' performance?
I think when you look and compare us internationally, we're not doing any better than we were. And in fact, in some cases, people think we're doing actually worse than we were doing many years ago. I'm not against testing per se. When I was a kid, we had no Department of Education, but we still took a national test. We took a California Achievement Test or an Iowa Standard Test so we could compare ourselves to other states. But no, what happens now is every state has a test. The federal government requires a test, and before you know it, the kids are taking 10 or 12 tests a year sometimes. The teachers feel that they're bound to teach to the test, and they can't do the curriculum and teach it the way they would like to. So I would like to empower teachers, local principals, local school boards, and parents to be involved in education, but I don't think it should be a distant bureaucrat in Washington.
I see. All right, I want to talk more about this, as well as some of the other policies, in particular jobs. How do you get jobs created in this country? So stay with us, Senator. A lot to talk about with you. But first, we want to put this education story into context. Take a look at what the rest of the 2016 GOP field is saying about education. Fox News senior correspondent Eric Shawn with that angle. Good morning to you, Eric.
Good morning, Maria, and good morning, everyone. You know, it was meant to raise educational standards and help the U.S. compete against China, India, and others in the global marketplace. But instead, Common Core has become a lightning rod to conservative critics, a federal government overreach, and an issue in this campaign.
Jeb is very, very strong on Common Core. He likes Common Core. I don't. I think it's terrible. I think education should be local.
That is the debate when it comes to the controversy over Common Core. Governor Jeb Bush has been the most prominent candidate who has supported its goals. His education foundation backed it. But as a campaign issue, he now calls Common Core, quote, poisonous.
Important topic that I hear about is Common Core state standards. And there's a fear, correct in an indirect way at least, that the federal government's encroachment in this is wrong. And I agree with that. There should be no involvement by the federal government in the creation of standards, content, or curriculum. And it ought to be prohibited by law.
Well, Ohio Governor John Kasich has criticized those who oppose Common Core standards, but even the name has become a trigger in this race.
Common Core doesn't encourage great teaching. It doesn't encourage responsibility in the hands of parents. Common Core, however it started, has turned into a federal government program that standardizes how teachers should teach and students should learn, and that over time will crush ingenuity and creativity.
No Common Core, no nationwide school board. Take power and money out of Washington and send it back to our states and back to the people at the school board level, where you can hold them accountable going forward.
Well, the irony is that Common Core was not created by the federal government at all, but by governors and adopted by 45 states. Supporters insist America needs it to stay competitive, but clearly that concept has soured in the heat of this Republican campaign. Maria?
All right, Eric, thanks very much. Eric Shawn with the latest there. More now with Kentucky Senator Rand Paul. And Senator, I guess overall, I mean, generally, broadly speaking, you just think government is too big and needs to be much smaller. That is the essence of your position, whether it be, closing down the Department of Education or anything else. Give us a sense of what that means in terms of spending and how you would change it in terms of budget issues.
Well, the key difference between the state government and the federal government is state governments in general have to balance their budget. The federal government, we just print more money, and we seem to be unconcerned, or at least some people up here are unconcerned about the debt. So if you sent education back to the state level, states are bound by balancing their budget. There's a limit to how much can be spent. The other thing we've found over the years, though, is that spending is not proportional to results. So the highest per pupil spending in the country, Washington, D.C., Baltimore, New York. But where are some of the least performing schools? Washington, Baltimore, New York. So what we have to figure out is another way to teach. And also we have to understand that often we blame teachers and schools, but I tell people they need to get a mirror and look in the mirror, because it's parents that are a big part of this, or the absence of parenting, which is a big part of the problem we have in this country. But if we're going to compete in this next century, we're going to have to do a better job, because the rest of the world is hungry. They're competing, they're studying hard, they're working harder than we are. And so our kids and our parents are going to have to realize it's a world economy now. And if you want to compete and you want to make money and you want to succeed, we're going to have to do better in school.
Yeah, it sure is. And that's also the reason that you want to lower corporate taxes so that multinational companies, American companies, will bring back the money that they're sitting on overseas and perhaps help the economy here. I want to get to how do you create jobs and all of that and other issues that are important to the American people. But you've got a lot of ideas, Senator. And the truth is it seems like Donald Trump, a couple of others in the GOP are sort of taking all the oxygen. How are you going to rise above the din and resonate with the American people? Look at the polls. You're 10th, tied with Chris Christie right now. Are you expecting to be in the next debate?
Well, absolutely. And one of the things I'll bring up in the next debate is my tax plan. I think that we lose American jobs overseas, and we're losing American companies overseas because the tax code is so onerous, so big, so cumbersome. We have a 70,000-page tax code, and I think we're chasing American jobs away. So I would eliminate the entire tax code, and I'd have one single flat tax for everybody. 14.5% for business, 14.5% for the individual. And I think people would be beating down our door wanting to come home, wanting to bring jobs here if we had a friendlier business environment.
But is that going to bring in enough revenue, 14.5% tax rates?
Well, no, and I think that's frankly the point. I want a smaller government. I think the primary responsibility of the federal government is defending the country. But after that, a lot of what we do in Washington really is something that could be done at the state and the local level. So we spend $3.8 trillion. I'd like to spend a lot less. In fact, I think we ought to start by just spending what comes in. We have about $3 trillion that comes in. I think we could have a strong national defense with that and do a few other things. But most of what we're doing in Washington, we shouldn't be doing. But here's the other thing. If you lower taxes dramatically,
right,
you'll actually ultimately increase revenue as business begins to boom again and we grow again and we become this great country again. But you have to do it by lowering taxes.
I don't disagree with that for sure, actually. Okay, final question here on this Labor Day weekend. How do you create jobs? What's the most important lever to push in terms of job creation?
I think the first thing you have to have is a debate over where jobs are created. I think they're created in the private sector. So that's why we as Republicans need to be for tax cuts, not just for revenue neutral reform. You need to leave more money in the productive economy. So that means my plan, which would leave nearly $3 trillion with the American people.
Right.
That's a stimulus, and that's how you create jobs.
Senator, good to have you on the program today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
We'll see you soon.